for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. One of his advocacy, enabling human-centric leaders to navigate a turbulent world, and of course, an author too, the author of the book Sparking Success, no other than Mr. Adam Kingl.
Hi, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Welcome, Mr. Adam. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss?
Yeah, of course. So I am an academic. I'm an author, a consultant, and a keynote speaker. Listeners might be able to tell from my accent, I'm originally from the US, but I've effectively spent the first half of my life in the US and the second half in the UK. So I'm talking to you now from my home just outside of London. And I'm on the faculty of a couple of different university business schools, University College London School of Management, and the Muller Leadership Institute at University of Cambridge, and a few others. So I work with international companies all over the world, talking about themes like culture, leadership, work-life, creativity and innovation, purpose, etc. So I focus a lot on the organizational behavior space, the strategy space, the innovation space. I originally worked in the media and entertainment industry, where I worked in marketing on the creative side, on strategy, and I was doing that in Los Angeles because where else would you work in that industry? But moved to London in 1999. And gradually shifted more toward the consulting space and then the academic space. So I've been working in the executive education area for about 20 years now. I led the Learning Solutions Department for Executive Education at London Business School for about a decade, and led the European corporate education business for Duke University before striking out on my own as an author and educator. So that's a little bit about me. My most recent book, I've written 2 books to date that have been published. My more recent book, which came out just 2 years ago, is in this innovation space, and it's called Sparking Success: Why Every Leader Needs to Develop a Creative Mindset. And this is a book which is very personal to me because it bridges my previous life in the creative media entertainment space with my current life in the business and executive education space. And the reason for that is that the purpose of the book is, how can we enhance our and our team's creative capacity in corporate life? And the book does that by looking at highly successful creative leaders and looking at their habits. How do they interact with their people? What kinds of questions do they ask? How do they spend their time? What are their emphases? And I tried to identify those things which anyone could apply, no matter what their industry, their function, etc. And I focused the subject of my observation and my interviews with highly successful leaders in the creative arts, because of course, creativity is their lifeblood. They have to maximize their innovation potential every day. So I interviewed some really fascinating people I deeply admire, like Sir Clive Gillinson, who is the artistic and managing director of Carnegie Hall in New York City. He used to be the managing director of the London Symphony Orchestra. Executives at Disney Imagineering. Imagineering is the function that designs the rides and other features in the theme parks for Disney all over the world. One of the head writers of the TV show Friends. All of these people face creative challenges and opportunities. And my assumption in going in, my hypothesis was a lot of the ways in which they enhance their creative capacity has to do with very human capabilities. So we could apply them in banking and consulting and FMCG and industry, you name it. It turns out you can. There are very few things I observed which I thought, you know what, you couldn't extrapolate that and use that in any other context. Almost everything could be generalized and could be applied. So I tried to ultimately create a very practical book while having inspirational stories from really fascinating people to learn a little bit about, and open up the curtain and look a little bit about what's happening back there. So I really enjoyed the research for the book, which took about a year. and very much enjoyed writing it and sharing it with the world.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, Mr. Adam. Thank you so
Sure.
much. And looking forward for more empowering books like this to come. Your title makes bold claim. Every leader needs a creative mindset in a world often focused on efficiency and data. Why is creativity now a non negotiable leadership skill?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, we know the world is changing ever faster. That's for a number of reasons. We know that volatility is increasing in many aspects of society, not just the sector of commerce. We know that the future is not an extrapolation of the past. And one of the biggest areas in which I find leaders fail in terms of enhancing their organization's relevance in the future is they get so caught up in just improving their margins, just slightly improving their products and services, just a little bit, just getting by, just survive, just do a little bit better next year than we did last year. And look, that strategy can work for a number of years, but sooner or later you realize that you've missed the future and your competitors are starting to eat your lunch. And we can't just rely on leaders to scan the universe and see what's happening out there. What are the technological trends, social trends, etc. Clearly, we have to enhance the perspective of the organization. So what sorts of questions could we ask? How could we be holding meetings so that we don't miss out on the future? One of the number one reasons that executives tell me they don't do these things is simply time, right? They say, I just don't have time to think about the future. Well, think about in any given organization, no matter how, a medium-sized organization, large organization, every employee in that company is looking up the hierarchy of the organization and saying, I don't have to think about the future. I don't have to think about innovation. I don't have to think about our next exponentially successful idea because they are thinking about it. And they is, of course, is anyone more senior than them. And of course, the senior executive suite, your chief XOs, they're the ones who are spending the majority of their time considering the future. And how are we going to be more relevant tomorrow than we are today? But what I discovered is when I talk to these people, mainly they aren't doing it either. There's a wonderful book by a colleague of mine named Peter Hinson. His book is called The Day After Tomorrow. And in the book, he talks about how much time on average are executives spending on horizon scanning, on innovation, on the future. And he asked two very important questions. How much time do you think you should be spending on those things? And how much time are you spending on those things? And he asked CEOs mainly. And the average response from CEOs in terms of how much time they should be spending on the day after tomorrow, and of course, I don't literally mean 48 hours later. When I say the day after tomorrow, I mean 5 years from now, 10 years from now. They thought on average they should be spending 70% of their time, 70, on those things. Because again, if they aren't doing it, who is? And then Peter asked them, how much time are you spending in a given week, in a given month, on the day after tomorrow? Average response was 2%. I'm not sure there's a bigger gap in corporate life today between an aspiration and a reality. The amount of time that we say we should be spending on innovation, on the future, et cetera, and how much time we're actually spending. And that means that there's an opportunity for companies who are willing to lean just a little bit farther into being more innovative, on think about enhancing their culture toward creativity just a little bit, because the gap is so huge typically between them and their competitors. And if you don't believe me, I did some of my own research, which indicates very much the same idea. Instead of thinking about time, I thought about the emphasis on creativity and innovation. And I was looking at two studies, one by Boston Consulting Group, BCG, that surveyed CEOs, again, all over the world, and said, what are your top 3 priorities? And roughly 4 out of 5 said creativity or innovation is one of those top 3 priorities. So they're all saying super important, top 3, no matter what. We definitely have to lean into innovation, et cetera. And then McKinsey, of course, a big competitor to BCG, at roughly the same time, this was a few years ago, roughly the same year, sent out another survey, but not to CEOs, but to the rank and file, the average workers all over the world, asking, how good is your company at creativity and innovation? And 94% said, we're terrible at it. Absolutely horrible. Their CEO is saying top priority. Their employees are saying, but we're no good at it. And so that's a fault of leadership. They're greenwashing innovation, saying it's important, but actually doing nothing about it. Here in the UK, and I'm sure this is true in many corners of the world, I'll give another example which demonstrates that this is so. Investment in R&D and innovation in the UK has declined by 50%, 50 in the last 5 years. No CEO in the UK is saying innovation isn't important. In fact, if anything, they're saying, again, top 3 priority. And so what's missing is, I think, executives, leaders, even middle managers saying, yeah, but so what do I have to do? What can I do to make innovation more priority? How can I make it part of my daily life without completely changing every process, habit, and incentive of my organization? And that's what my book, Sparking Success, is attempting to answer.
What does sparking success imply about the role of a leader? Is it about igniting new ideas, inspiring teams, or something else?
It's certainly all those things. I think what I really looked at is when exploring the creative process that leaders had in terms of actually bringing novelty to fruition and be able to commercialize those ideas. Is there are really 3 stages. One is ideation, right? Which is literally just thinking of ideas, of alternatives, of options, etc. Second is selection. What is your criteria for selection? Why do you choose to put more resources in this idea versus that idea? And of course, the final area is implementation. Implementation is actually quite key as well, not just inspiration, but implementation. Because a lot of good ideas fail, not because they weren't good ideas, but because leaders failed in creating the right pipeline, the planning, the execution of the idea. And that also means that sometimes great ideas don't just form, fully formed, a perfect thought. All we have to do is make that happen. You sometimes have to iterate toward the right idea. You take the kernel of that idea and you experiment in small doses and you kind of isolate and corner what direction you need to go in. So that's first, 3 stages. The second thing, of course, that I realized is a lot of leaders, as a cautionary tale said, don't try to do any of those things at the same time. So in other words, just do ideation until you're finished with that stage. Then just think about selection and evaluation. Then just think about implementation and execution. So as an example, what do I mean by that? If you're having a brainstorming meeting and people are throwing out suggestions, and you at the same time are evaluating those ideas, that's a good idea, that's a bad idea, right? We might run that, we're not going to run that. You're probably killing lots of egos in that room. And then those leaders go, oh, my people aren't very creative. They never suggest good ideas. Yeah, because you disincentivize them to suggest new ideas, right? Before even giving them the time of day, before even letting the idea breathe for even a few seconds, you've killed the idea in the crib. You haven't thought, wait a minute, is there something there? Maybe it's not that idea, but something like that. So yes, so the book explores kind of the macro idea of bringing ideas from conception to fruition, but also just in all the myriad conversations that one would have to go through that process. What's the vocabulary you could use? What are the kinds of questions that you could be asking? How do you help people feel encouraged and inspired and engaged and want to come to you with more ideas rather than, not worth it, totally, disengaged from this. I'll just put my head down and do my job. As you can tell, for all of these things, it really all starts from leadership. That's why the subtitle of the book is why every leader needs to develop a creative mindset. That doesn't imply that everyone else in the organization shouldn't have a creative mindset, but it has to start from leadership. And that's because leaders are stewards of culture. They are the role models of the behaviors that we need a little bit more of, and disincentivizing the behaviors we need a little bit less of. Two academics I really admire who wrote some seminal books like Why Should Anyone Be Led by You? Why Should Anyone Work Here? Professors Rob Goffey and Gareth Jones. They gave a wonderfully elegant definition of culture, which is simply two words: shared behaviors. That's it. Shared behaviors. What that means then is that leaders can't say one thing and do another. They have to indicate in word and deed what we need to be doing and saying every day. And that these are these micro habits that I'm referring to, the ways in which we have conversations, the ways in which we might run a meeting. And ever so gradually, everyone subconsciously goes, oh, okay, if that's what I do, I'll be successful around here too. Because the people who are already senior and successful around here, that's what they're doing. And the culture gradually shifts. People may not even perceive that the shift is happening. But if a leadership community is aligned on the behaviors, in this case of innovation and creativity, then that percolates and that becomes the new normal in an organization. Then you have an organization which embraces a capacity for creativity.
Very well said, Mr. Adam. Very well said indeed. Truly, truly empowering. And as an author, what are your short-term and long-term goals?
Well, I have a one-term goal right now, and that's to produce my next book. And this
Yes.
is going to be very different from the last one. It's actually a cookbook, but it's a cookbook for a business audience. It's going to come out, I believe, on June 9th, and it's called Executive Eats, the cookbook for a working life. So it's thinking about, the reason it came about is I was thinking about all these areas that executives tell me they need to do better at in relation to their performance. Feeling more inspired every day, boosting their mood, having more sustained energy. And I was thinking, well, surely some of that is going to be a function of what we're putting in our bodies. So I'm working with a colleague, Dr. Jakub Radzikowski at Imperial College London, who works in chemistry, biology, about what are the ingredients then that would affect these crucial qualities in professional performance. And then the next step, of course, is that he and I write a number of recipes for the reader to help them to achieve those ambitions in their personal wellness and performance. Jakob and I are both big foodies, so it's not like we're brand new to the world of food. Jakob has worked in Michelin star restaurants. He studied at Le Cordon Bleu. I did a shorter course at Le Cordon Bleu, worked in a professional restaurant for a year when I was in graduate school. So we do have some culinary chops to back up creating this cookbook. But I think this is another example of just trying to improve my own creative capacity by thinking about combining different ideas in new ways. I've never seen a cookbook specifically for an executive audience. For athletes, sure. For lots of other issues, particularly medical issues or wanting, veganism, et cetera. You name it, all of those incredibly useful and important. But not one for the audience that I deal with every day. And I love cookbooks. I have hundreds of cookbooks. That's one thing I collect in my life. So that's my short-term goal. My long-term goal is then how do you spread that word? And that means I have to talk to a different audience, not just business and executive audiences. Think about people who are coming to food festivals and the average person who's walking into a bookstore and looking at, wandering over to the food section. How do you achieve that kind of cut through to make them think about not just cooking for your family, but cooking for yourself, helping yourself to be better personally and professionally at work, and thinking about that not just by looking at the health section, but by looking at that cookbook section. So I'm kind of scaring myself and inspiring myself at the same time by getting into an area that expands my brand in an area that people don't know of me. They don't think of those themes when they think of me. So long-term goal is to really build that effect of association and add that arrow to my quiver.
Good luck to your goals, Mr. Adam, and looking forward for more success.
Thank
And
you.
what would be your piece of advice for those people out there who want to be an author like you?
Well, I mean, one thing I've noticed, both in myself and when I talk to other authors, is often, one of the main questions I get is, well, how do you make sure you write the book, right? How do you stay motivated? How do you budget your time, etc.? And look, what I first have to say is maybe the main piece of advice is it works differently for different people. So this is not a one-stop shop that will work for every personality, right? We all have different life circumstances as well, which means you have different amounts of time and part times in the year in which we can write. Here, so all I can share is what works for me. And that is actually it's quite a bit different than a lot of what other people say. I wait until I think I have something to say, an idea in a chapter. I have an idea. So then I sit down and I write it. I try to find the moments and then make sure I don't lose it and write it down rather than saying, okay, on Wednesday, I will sit from 12 to 4 and I'm going to write. Well, what if I don't have anything to think about and say between 12 and 4? So what I do is I wait for those moments and then I sit down, and I might sit down only for 10 minutes. It might be 4 hours. That's what's worked for me. But that's also a function of my circumstances. I can govern a lot of my time myself. My first book, Next Generation Leadership, I wrote that while I was also working full time. A little bit of a different ball game. I had to carve out weekend time, holiday time, etc. I really like the way that I write now because, of course, then I'm seizing moments when I want to do that task of writing.
Well, thank you for that advice, Mr. Adam. And can you please recommend a book or books that influence your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So a few. I mentioned two already from Rob Goffey and Gareth Jones. Why Should Anyone Be Led by You? Why Should Anyone Work Here? And I'll mention another by them, Character of a Corporation. I think those have all been incredibly important in my writing, the way I think about these themes. And then there's another one, which is called The Future of Management, and it's by Gary Hamel. And I think it's a really important one when thinking about the future of work and how management is shifting, and even how organizations have to change to meet the moments of the 21st century.
Well, thank you for that recommended book, Mr. Adam. And before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, my other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too. Comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well. Geography 101 in fourth season, and my baby podcast, Law 101 and Mental Health 101, Love Letters in its third season, and my movie 101 review, Music 101 in fourth season, and Science 101 and Sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcasts. So, Mr. Adam, if you could leave every leader with one fundamental principle from sparking success, what would it be?
Pick one habit. Just try one new piece of vocabulary that you think would help move your people from A to B. Engage them just a little bit more into living creatively. You've actually made a lot more progress than you might think.
Definitely. Mr. Adam Kingl, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And we are looking forward for that upcoming book. Please do come over and let's talk about it and promote to the world. So can you please invite our listeners to support your books itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are three books that I encourage readers to take a look at: Next Generation Leadership, Sparking Success, and the upcoming Executive Eats. Thank you.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Adam Kingl because if you support him, for sure, more and more empowering books like this to come. So, Mr. Adam, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
More to come, people. See you soon.